Hello everyone, my name is Droogie Forever, and today we're playing a game called Rituals in the Dark. This was a very interesting looking visual novel, and I thought we'd give it a try, although it may or may not have some adult content, so if it gets crazy, I'll probably stop the video. I don't have a ton of time to record anyway, so it's not going to be super long, but... Aspen Draper was probably one of the last people to see the elderly Miss Ley still alive, and she was definitely the first person to see her after she had died. Miss Ley had lived next door to Aspen for as long as the teenage girl could remember in her semi-detached house on Paradise Road. Paradise Road, despite its grandiose name, didn't live up to expectations. It was like any other street in Scarborough, really gray, cramped, and gently sloping down the side of a shallow hill. The pavement was usually littered with takeaway cartons from kebab houses. The bins never seemed to get emptied on time, no matter how often Aspen's mother complained to the local council, and at night, Aspen could often hear stray cats fighting, or worse, mating, outside her window. Despite the street's numerous flaws, however, Miss Ley had lived there for almost all her life, or ever since I got married to Ivor, as she herself put it. Aspen had lived in Paradise Road all her life, too, and though she'd met Miss Ley on many occasions, she'd never had the pleasure of speaking to her husband. Ivor had died before Aspen had been born. Miss Ley was old, though. Aspen didn't know quite how old. Aspen presumed the woman must have been in her 70s or 80s, maybe even 90s, but it seemed rude to ask. The elderly Miss Ley was a mysterious creature with no fixed age. She had looked much the same to Aspen when she was 6 and when she was 16. If Miss Ley had changed at all over the decade, Aspen couldn't tell. Miss Ley exuded a constant aura of frailty and elderliness, an aura which was further compounded by her penchant for closing her blue, rheumy eyes and mumbling, "Back in my day." Aspen didn't know when exactly Miss Ley's day had been, but it must have been years and years ago. Decades, even. It was certainly long before Aspen had been born, and it might have been before her parents had been born, too. Miss Ley didn't seem to have any friends or family. Though Aspen had lived next door to Miss Ley for 16, bordering on 17 years, she rarely saw cars that weren't Miss Ley's old, unused Nissan parked in the driveway. The car had probably belonged to Ivor when he was still alive. Maybe that's why Miss Ley never touched it. I don't know if it's Ivor or Ivor. I don't know how to pronounce it. I just keep saying Ivor. I don't know. We'll see. Could she even drive? The old woman seemed so very frail with her slender wrists and her slow, shuffling gait that Aspen doubted it. Aspen had never seen any children, grandchildren, nieces, or nephews grace the doorstep of Miss Ley's home. It was just Miss Ley and occasionally the woman from the council called Rebecca, but call me Bex, who came around a few times a week to buy Miss Ley groceries and clean her kitchen. Thinking about it, Rebecca should have been the one to discover Miss Ley's body first. Surely that was her job. Rebecca was employed not only to aid the elderly woman in her twilight years, but to save any poor, wide-eyed, nail-biting neighborhood girls from stumbling upon Miss Ley's corpse during the winter months. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Rebecca hadn't shown up on that particular Sunday. Sunday was her day off, and Aspen had, and it had been Aspen who had found the body, not Rebecca. That's just how life goes. But to arrive at the point of Aspen finding Miss Ley's body, the old woman's eyes rolled up in her head and her mouth twisted from a sudden heart attack. We have to go back. Aspen had spent most of her life ignoring Miss Ley as best she could, though her mother had told her to smile and wave when she saw the old deer pottering around in her garden. That's what Aspen's mother called Miss Ley, the old dear, and Aspen supposed she was harmless enough. Privately, however, Aspen had always thought Miss Ley was a little creepy. Miss Ley was a small and shrunken creature, like a living specimen pickled in vinegar. Her hair was very thin and white, and it was often tied back in a bun that exposed a worrying amount of baby pink scalp. Her fingers, meanwhile, were gnarled like the roots of a tree. Miss Ley would sometimes meander around in her front garden when the weather was nice and her joints were up to it. She'd finger the overgrown cluster of sweet peas and the pear trees that were even older and frailer than she was with a satisfied nod, as though the plants in her garden were supposed to be dying. Maybe Miss Ley was so old, her eyesight so poor, she simply couldn't see that her precious roses had been half devoured by caterpillars, her snapdragons and marigolds overrun by weeds. Or maybe she did know, but she knew she was too old to do anything about it. Miss Ley could hardly don a pair of gardening gloves and kneel down in the dirt at her age, whatever her age was. She'd thrown her back out or dislocate a kneecap, and then she'd never be able to get back up again. Miss Lay seemed perfectly content to meander, nursing a mug of warm tea in her choppy fingers and a thick cardigan thrown over her shoulders as she admired what had once been a pretty flower garden. When Miss Lay saw Aspen, typically on her way back home from primary school or ballet practice, she would smile and say how big she was getting. Aspen, who'd always been shy, would murmur words of thanks at her mother's behest, then hurry indoors where Miss Lay's sad smile couldn't reach her. For many years, these were the only interactions the two had, but that changed on Aspen's 13th birthday, when the old woman did something quite surprising. She bought Aspen a present. Well, bought might not have been the correct word. Miss Lay rarely went 3 paces past her front garden, and she certainly never went to Sainsbury's. That was Rebecca's job. Instead, Miss Lay wrapped one of her own little ornaments up in paper, put it inside a shoebox, and left it on the draper's doorstep with a card attached. The ornament was small and made of painted ceramic, though most of the paint had flaked away. It depicted a little girl in a leotard and tutu, her hair tied back with a ribbon, standing in point with her arms extended. One of the girl's hands had snapped off, and her nose was broken, but it was a sweet gesture all the same. Aspen's father had been convinced the little ornament was worth a pretty penny, and he took it to an antique shop to be appraised, much to his wife's irritation. "I'm not going to sell it, Penny," Mr. Draper had tried to assure his wife. "This belongs to Aspen. I just want to satisfy my own curiosity. You never know. It could be something special." Aspen's father incidentally worked as a curator at the Scarborough Art Gallery. He spent his days examining works of art, and he had a vested interest in how old, and more importantly, how expensive, little trinkets like Miss Lay's ballerina figure were. Unfortunately, a quick trip to the antique shop revealed that the ballerina was almost entirely worthless, but that is neither here nor there. The card Miss Lay left Aspen was decorated with an image of a young rosy-cheeked girl in a pale blue dress playing with a jump rope. The card was very pastel, almost washed out, and seemed to have come from another era, maybe the 60s or 70s. Inside the card, Miss Lay had written, in a faint and spidery hand, "Dear Althea." Miss Lay often got Aspen's name wrong. "I hope you like your present. I saw it and it reminded me of you. I know you practice ballet and I thought you might get more enjoyment out of it than I do. Love, Marguerite." Up until that day, Aspen hadn't known what Miss Lay's first name was. She'd always called her Miss Lay. She'd never even stopped to consider that Miss Lay might have a first name at all. It almost seemed inconceivable. Miss Lay's name, Marguerite, didn't really suit her. The name was too light and jaunty. It conjured up images of pretty dark-haired girls in red ruffled dresses, dancing beneath the moonlight, not an elderly woman in frumpy clothes nodding benignly at clusters of worm-eaten primroses. Maybe Miss Lay had been more like a Marguerite in the past. Maybe her white hair had been dark and she had worn red ruffles, and she had danced the night away. She must have been young and vivacious and full of life once upon a time. Maybe it had been when Ivor was still alive, however long ago that was, but Aspen couldn't imagine it. Aspen didn't want to call Miss Lay Marguerite. For some reason it made her feel sad. It felt too much like a wasted opportunity. Past time that would never, ever come back. Miss Lay was always and would always be Miss Lay to Aspen. The revelation of Miss Lay's full name, however, was not the crucial takeaway from that letter. It was clear that, though Miss Lay and Aspen had only exchanged the briefest of greetings over the last 13 years, Miss Lay had been paying more attention to Aspen than she herself had ever realized. True, she had gotten Aspen's name wrong. Aspen was quite an unusual name, not very Yorkshire. Then again, neither was Althea, but Miss Lay knew enough about Aspen to know she took ballet classes. At least she had taken ballet classes. Aspen had quit when she started secondary school. Going to her lessons every Friday had been a painful experience. The ballet mistress, one Miss Preobrazhenskaya, who hailed from Russia and whose name Aspen could not pronounce, was very strict, and if she was bad, the other girls were worse. Aspen had attended ballet class from the age of 5 with the childish dream of someday being a dancer. The young girl soon learned, however, that she was not and would never be as charming, flexible, or beautiful as the other little swans. She just didn't have the knack. Aspen had already given up on her dancing dreams when Miss Lay bequeathed her that tiny ballerina, but it was a thoughtful gift nevertheless. "It was very kind of her," said Aspen's mother, Penny. "You should go over to her house and thank her." Aspen hadn't wanted to go to Miss Lay's house and thank her. She would have rather stuck her fingers in the toaster. "Now, don't be like that," Penny had said, tutting. "Miss Lay is an old, lonely woman. She needs some company, and she did send you a gift. You should show a bit of appreciation." Aspen's mother could be quite assertive when she wanted, and the young girl knew there was no getting around her. She had to go and visit Miss Ley, and so she did. One Sunday morning, with her hair neatly braided, wearing a blue gingham dress, Aspen walked through Miss Ley's overgrown front garden and knocked on her door. She intended to say a quick thank you for the gift and bolt, but Miss Ley had other ideas. With a small smile betraying just the slightest twinge of discomfort, Miss Ley had arthritis, and even smiling seemed to hurt her. The old woman ushered Aspen inside. What could she do? Refuse? If she had, Penny, who was always anxious about maintaining good relationships with the neighbors, would have flayed her. So Aspen, hesitant though she was, stepped inside. When Miss Ley closed the wooden front door behind her, Aspen couldn't help but feel like one of the children from Hansel and Gretel. Excuse me. Was Miss Ley going to lock her in a cage, cook her in her oven? But Aspen never met such a grotesque end. Miss Ley struggled to pick up her reading glasses, let alone 13-year-old girls. There was no way she could have crammed Aspen into her oven, and anyway, it wasn't big enough. This was no fairy tale, and Miss Ley's designs were of a far less sinister nature than any wicked witch. She just wanted somebody to talk to, and that was how Aspen became Miss Ley's unwilling confidant. Almost every Sunday, rain or shine, Aspen would show up at Miss Ley's house for mid-morning tea. Miss Ley's fingers trembled something awful, and her movements were slow and shuffling, but she always insisted on making the tea herself. Not content to serve Aspen the same blends every visit, she instructed Rebecca to buy all sorts of different leaves during her big Saturday shop at the nearby Tesco. Sitting in one of the overstuffed armchairs in Miss Ley's living room, which was strangely uncomfortable despite being piled high with cushions, Aspen would sample teas of varying flavors. The tea was often served with biscuits or chocolates, pink wafers, ginger nuts, custard creams, chocolate fingers, and bourbons. Miss Ley never ate any of the biscuits herself. She laughed and said she was on a diet. That didn't stop her from plying her young guest with sweets, though, and Aspen was too worried about upsetting her to say no. Her tongue burning from the too hot tea, Aspen tried to drink it as quickly as possible, and her stomach churning from too much chocolate, Aspen would sit there and let Miss Ley talk. Miss Ley talked about a large number of things during her visits, but Aspen could never remember much of it. Miss Ley talked about people Aspen had never met, all of them dead, buried, and places Aspen had never been. Sometimes Miss Ley managed to get Aspen's name right, but more often than not she called her Althea, and the whole while Aspen, who began to wonder if she wasn't called Althea after all, sat there and smiled. The clock ticked slowly, counting away the seconds, minutes, and hours Aspen would never get back. If Miss Ley knew Aspen wasn't particularly interested in their tete-a-tetes, she never gave any indication of it. Maybe she was too lost in her own reminiscences to realize how uncomfortable she made her young guest. Or maybe she was so blind she simply couldn't see. Either way, regardless of Aspen's personal feelings, those sad and somber tea parties continued for several years. This routine, more familiar than clockwork, eventually came to an end, however, and it came to an end in the most gruesome manner 3 years later, one January morning. It had been unpleasantly cold during the winter. According to the news, they were going through a cold snap. Icy winds blew in from the sea, and the wind howled despairingly in the night. Aspen walked to school wearing 2 sweatshirts beneath her coat, but it made little difference. By the time she got to her classroom, her fingers felt so frozen she worried they might shatter. Aspen's visits to Miss Ley didn't abate during this cold period, though Aspen felt chilled to the bone. Miss Ley seemed to be doing well for herself. As well as a woman of indeterminate age could do, at least. Miss Ley didn't look any sicker than she usually did, and though she complained that her arthritis was playing her up, these were the same complaints Aspen had heard for the last 3 years. Aspen didn't pay it any heed, not until one particular visit. Aspen sat on Miss Ley's brown couch in her equally brown living room, which smelt strangely enough of chopped liver, her hands in her lap. Outside, the wind howled. Miss Ley was in the kitchen. She'd gone to brew the tea and plate up the biscuits as per her normal routine. Aspen had offered to help, but Miss Ley waved this small act of kindness aside. "It's very kind of you, dear," she said, "but I'm not infirm just yet. I can take care of myself. You'll sit down and read a magazine." Obedient to a fault, Aspen sat down because she didn't read a magazine. Miss Ley was subscribed to Women's Weekly and Women at Home, neither of which Aspen found riveting. Instead, Aspen watched the clock. The minutes slowly passed, 1, then 2, then 5. Still, Miss Ley did not come back from the kitchen. Though Miss Lay often took her time brewing the tea and plating the biscuits she did have our arthritis to contest with, she didn't normally take that long. Aspen wouldn't have been so troubled if she could have heard the sounds of the old kettle brewing or cupboard slamming, but everything was curiously quiet. So Aspen got to her feet, her heart pounding with trepidation. Already she knew something was wrong, and exited the living room. She walked through the hallway, sidestepping an old pair of Miss Lay's slippers and a little wooden table topped with a chunky telephone, and made her way to the kitchen. "Miss Lay?" she said softly, questioningly. "Miss Lay?" But there was no reply. Aspen stood by the kitchen door, which was closed. She felt sick. At that moment, she already knew, via some deep primordial instinct that lays dormant inside each and every one of us, that if she opened that door, there would be no going back. Her life would never be the same again, but Aspen shook her head. She told herself, like we so often tell ourselves when we know something to be true not with facts, but with our own intuition, that she was being silly, and so she opened the door. What Aspen saw that day stayed with her ever since, like a birthmark. The old-fashioned kettle had finished boiling and steam was slowly rising from the spout. 2 mugs had been set on the counter, already filled with tea leaves. They were ready to receive the warm water from the kettle, but no water was forthcoming. A plate of biscuits lay by the mugs. Miss Lay had prepared jammy Dodgers. The jam looked so very red and artificial beneath the yellow lights it was almost nauseating. And as for Miss Lay herself, she was sitting, though perhaps sitting isn't the right word, at the kitchen table. She was leant back in her chair, fingers resting on the tabletop and her cardigan half falling off one shoulder, and she was quite still. She was so still Aspen would have supposed she was sleeping, save for one crucial detail. Her eyes were open. Her eyes were open so wide they were almost bulging out of her head. Miss Lay's milky blue irises were rolled upwards, revealing a worrying amount of white, and her head was lolling. Her mouth was open, too. Her face was contorted into a frightening, silent scream, for no noise would come from her mouth. She was dead. It was a heart attack, the doctors said when they arrived on the scene. It had been a quiet, understated kind of death, all things considered. The old woman hadn't made a single sound. Miss Lay, while preparing the plate of biscuits, must have felt a stab of pain inside her chest. Accustomed to such aches and pains, she was an old woman after all. She'd sat down at the kitchen table and waited for the pain to pass. Miss Lay hadn't tried to get Aspen's attention, though perhaps the thought had flittered through her mind. She hadn't wanted to worry her guest. Maybe Miss Lay had always known, though she never admitted it, that Aspen found their weekly tea parties a chore. The old woman was aware she was imposing on the young girl, but how could she help herself? Aspen was the only company she had other than Rebecca. Miss Lay hadn't wanted to cause more trouble than she had already, so she'd sat there, her body racked with pain, while the kettle brewed and very silently and very politely passed away. All things considered, it was quite a British way to go. Maybe one could even call it noble, brave, heroic. But the thought of Miss Lay suffering silently, too anxious to ask Aspen for help, only made the young girl feel even guiltier. If only she could have done something, but Aspen had done nothing, and by the time she'd realized something was amiss, it was already too late. That was the first time Aspen had seen a dead body outside of scenes in detective dramas or movies. She hoped it would be the last. Unfortunately, none of her classmates or even her friends would ever let her live it down. So, did it really happen next door? That's right. That's where you found her body? Yeah. Ew, how creepy. Pippa glanced about Aspen's bedroom, which was joined, though separated, by a lilac wall to what had once been Miss Lay's house. How does it feel living next to a place where a body was found? It doesn't feel like anything, really. Oh, come on, it has to feel like something. Doesn't it creep you out? Not particularly. Have you ever heard any strange noises at night? What kinds of strange noises? Well, I don't know. Wailing, crying, anything like that? No? Have you ever stepped into any cold patches of air or felt shivers run down your spine? Well, Aspen thought for a moment in a half-hearted attempt to oblige her friend, then shook her head. Wow. Aspen was being fairly reticent, but Pippa looked impressed all the same. She whistled beneath her breath. It's still seriously creepy. I'd be so freaked out if I had to live next to a spooky old house like that. Spooky? Lockie raised a neatly plucked eyebrow. This isn't a horror movie, and we're not little kids. I know, but it's the thought of it. Can you imagine? Aspen bit her lower lip. She didn't need to imagine, she'd already seen Miss Lay's body. Pippa hadn't. Maybe that was why she sounded so gleeful about the whole sorry affair. Her house looks so run down, too. The garden's a mess and the windows are all boarded up. I guess nobody's moved in yet. I don't think anybody would want to. It would be quite a hard sell for even the most charismatic of real estate agents. And here we have the kitchen. It's located near the back of the house, away from the road. It's got windows looking out into the garden, a refrigerator, a washing machine, and an oven. And if you look to your right, that's where the previous occupant was found, stone cold dead at the breakfast table. It really makes you think about the briefness of life, doesn't it? It's a short candle. So the months went by and nobody moved into Miss Lay's house, except the squatters. The squatters broke in through the windows. They probably stole most of the stuff inside the house. None of Miss Lay's possessions had been moved. She had no relatives to collect them, and she hadn't left a will. The squatters banged about in Miss Lay's home until the early hours of the morning and made such a racket, Aspen's mother complained to the local council. The council got the house boarded up, but that was about it. Whatever remained of Miss Lay's belongings, her lavender-stuffed cushions and her little china figures and her floral rugs that smelt strangely musky, were still shut up inside, waiting for an owner who would never return. The garden, which had brought Miss Lay such joy, was now deader than ever, if such a thing was possible. The weeds had overrun the snapdragons and stifled the marigolds, and the roses were more holes than flowers. But despite that, life continued on. It continued on for girls like Lockie and Pippa, at least, who were completely divorced from the memory of Miss Lay's sightless eyes and twisted mouth. But it didn't for Aspen. Not properly. How could it, when whenever Aspen closed her eyes, she saw the image of Miss Lay's dead body beneath her lids, like a grotesque tattoo. Pippa leaned forward, her voice dripping to a whisper. And what was it like seeing it? How did it make you feel? Lockie, who had disdain down to a fine art, wrinkled her nose. I bet it was disgusting. Look, you guys. Aspen shifted on the edge of her bed, fingers linked together. Her bare right foot twitched against the carpet. I don't want to talk about it. Why not? We're your friends, aren't we? We are friends, but you don't need to tell anybody else, but you can tell us. Scout's honor. You've never once been a scout. It's a figure of speech. Well, I can't really remember. It was more than 5 months ago. Liar. What? People don't just forget things like that. At least I wouldn't. Too bad we're not all geniuses like you, Lockie. I'm not a genius. I just bothered to study for my exams, unlike a certain somebody. Oh, get you. You're so la-di-da. It was dark outside beyond Aspen's drawn curtains, and the three girls were sitting on the edge of Aspen's bed in their pajamas. While Aspen and Pippa were dressed demurely, Lockie was attired in something a little more revealing. Lockie's nightwear, if it could be called as such, was a very sheer nightgown with thin straps that shone pearl white beneath the dim glow of Aspen's bedside lamp. Aspen wondered if it wasn't too cold in Scarborough, which was by the seafront, to wear such skimpy clothes, but perhaps Lockie's body was still attuned to the warmth of Indian summers, despite the fact her parents had moved to England when she was still a child. It wasn't yet midnight, and the three girls wouldn't be going to sleep for several more hours. That was how sleepovers worked. There was rarely, if ever, any sleep involved, but Lockie had insisted that they change into their nightwear as soon as 10 o'clock came around. Lockie said she felt more comfortable in her pajamas, but Aspen privately thought she just wanted to show off her new nightgown. Almost all of Lockie's things were new. Her family was rich, and she had no qualms about flaunting it. Lockie flaunted quite a lot, thought Aspen, as she surreptitiously, why do I have trouble with that word, admired her friend's slender legs. Come on, Aspen! Pippa, Aspen's more stereotypically British friend who had perpetually flushed cheeks and ginger hair, pouted. We've been really nice to you about this whole thing. I mean, we didn't get on your case too much when you found that old lady, did we? Maybe not, but everybody else did. Aspen hung her head. Her dark hair fell in front of her eyes, obscuring her face. After Aspen found the body of Miss Lay, she became something of a local celebrity. Aspen hadn't told anybody about her discovery, but the news had traveled fast. Jenny's mother worked at the local hospital. She'd been one of the first people to hear about Miss Lay's fate. Jenny's mother had told Jenny all about the awful affair and how traumatizing it must have been for everyone involved. It wouldn't have been half as traumatic if Jenny's mother had adhered to basic confidentiality clauses. Jenny told Anna, and Anna told Lucy, and Lucy, being Lucy, told the world. When Aspen returned to school on Monday, a wiser but a sadder girl, she was suddenly thrust into the unwanted, unasked-for role of a celebrity. Everybody wanted to know what finding a dead body had been like. They wanted precise details, right down to the volume of saliva trickling from Miss Lay's open mouth. Aspen, who'd always been a bit on the awkward side, a wallflower if you will, had shied away from these queries. She didn't like being in the spotlight at the best of times, and she certainly didn't enjoy reliving those sickening seconds when she had stumbled upon Miss Lay's body at the breakfast table. If she had to be famous for something, she'd rather be famous for being funny and audacious like Pippa or beautiful and clever like Lockie. But Aspen wasn't funny and audacious, she certainly wasn't beautiful, and though her grades were good, they weren't as good as Lockie's. Aspen was quiet and softly spoken, and she rarely raised her hand in class, even when she knew the answer to a question. It didn't seem worth the effort. In lieu of having any real abilities or any noteworthy achievements, Aspen became famous for finding a corpse. It wasn't much of a claim to fame. In fact, the whole thing was quite depressing. The hubbub surrounding Aspen died down within a few weeks once her classmates realized it'd be easier to pry juicy gossip from Miss Lay's cold blue lips than Aspen's, but a faint undercurrent of intrigue remained. From that day forth, Aspen knew she'd never be regarded as Aspen Draper anymore, not even among her teachers. She was, and always would be, the girl who discovered a dead body. 6 months had passed since then, but Aspen still couldn't escape from the ghostly memory of Miss Lay. Won't you tell us what she looked like? I want to know. I don't want to think about it. But if you don't tell us, I'll spend the whole night thinking about it, and then I won't get any sleep. It's the uncertainty that kills me. Aspen didn't reply. Instead, she ducked her head, idly tracing patterns on her bedspread. To Aspen, it was the certainty that really unsettled her. She could try and explain it, but somehow she didn't think Pippa would understand. It was a little like the Thestrals in Harry Potter, Aspen mused. She had taken great comfort in her favorite childhood books after finding Miss Lay's body. Death only made sense to people unfortunate enough to see it, while those who hadn't could never hope to understand how frighteningly real it was. Well, you're no fun. Pippa pouted and folded her arms as if talking about a dead woman could ever be fun, and by remaining silent, Aspen had cruelly robbed her of a diverting amusement. I'm sorry. Aspen apologized, her head bowed because she didn't know what else to say. What was there to say? Well, it's only 11. We need to do something fun to pass the time. Pippa pondered for a few moments, tapping a finger against her lower lip before... Her eyes lit up. Maybe we should play a game. I don't want to play any of your silly games. I could chip a nail. It won't be a silly game, Lockie. It'll be really mature, I promise. Since Aspen's parents aren't here, we can really go all out. What do you mean, exactly? I mean... Pippa drummed her fingers against the bedside table, perhaps in an attempt to build anticipation. We should play Truth or Dare! Aspen felt her stomach sinking through her body to the bottom of her feet and all the way down to the floor. All of a sudden, she felt sick. Aspen had played Truth or Dare with Pippa during their sleepovers before, and Aspen still bore the scars to that day. Pippa's imagination was inexhaustible, and it never failed to conjure up disgusting dares and excruciating truths. Once, Pippa had made Aspen eat a worm. Another time, Pippa made Aspen climb inside the washing machine. When Aspen's mother had found her, she'd almost hit the roof. She'd shouted at Pippa, who'd been 6 years old at the time, and phoned her mother to come pick her up immediately. If her mother had been there now, she never would have let Pippa play such a dangerous game. But Aspen's mother wasn't there. Neither was her father. Aspen's parents were away on a cruise around the Mediterranean. The cruise had been booked almost a year in advance, and tickets were hard to come by. Penny and James had offered to cancel when their daughter found Miss Slay, of course. They'd worried that being all alone in the house next to the sealed-off mortuary where Miss Slay's corpse had been found might disturb their only daughter. Aspen, however, had reassured them that she would be all right. In fact, she insisted that they go. She wasn't a child. She was almost 17 and she could look after herself. If she ever felt overwhelmed by the sheer presence of Miss Slay's memory, she could invite Pippa and Lockie over, and her mother liked Lockie. She thought she was sensible. When it came to Pippa, she was a little less keen. Unfortunately, inviting Pippa and Lockie over seemed to be doing more harm to Aspen's tenuous mental state than good. Aspen was beginning to wonder whether she might have been better off alone after all, with nothing but her memories for company. At least they couldn't ask too many probing questions, or make her climb into any washing machines. This Truth or Dare? Lockie, who'd met Pippa and Aspen in secondary school and didn't know anything about the washing machine incident, frowned. What is it exactly? It's simple. One player gets to be in charge of the other two. The leader asks the others truth or dare. If they pick truth, they have to answer any question they're asked truthfully. Or if they pick dare, then the leader can give them a command and they have to fulfill it. It's like the law. Can the leader pick any truth or dare? That's right. Within reason. I see. Interesting. Aspen looked at Lockie hopefully. She prayed that her friend would look down her nose at this proposed party game, as she did with so many things, and deride it as being beneath her. Well, I suppose it isn't too childish if you ask the right questions. Aspen's face blanched. Lockie had let her down, and she didn't even seem to realize it. You've never played Truth or Dare with Pippa before, have you? No, I haven't. Why? Is there something I need to know? It's just, her dares can be quite creative. What? Are you still sore about the washing machine thing, Aspen? Aspen wasn't literally sore about it now, but she had been at the time, though her parents had quite a large, fancy washing machine. It had been a gift from James's father. It was made for trousers and jumpers, not 6-year-old girls. Aspen had always been short and slight, but climbing into the washing machine had been quite a squeeze. She'd been terrified she wouldn't be able to get back out again, and she'd managed to bruise her right arm most fabulously. It had been purple and green for weeks afterward. Lockie, who was none the wiser, blinked curiously. What's a washing machine thing? It's a long story. Don't get bent out of shape about it, Aspen. It was years ago. I'm not that immature. You kept making little balls with the soldering iron in tech last term and flicking them at Colin with your ruler. Well, he deserved it. He kept making fun of my hair. Miss Langley wasn't very happy when he found out about it. Mr. Langley, sorry. Mr. Langley isn't happy about anything, stupid old git. Pippa huffed at the injustice of it all, her arms folded. Pippa was something of a wild child. When she wasn't coercing 6-year-olds into washing machines, granted that had only happened once, she was getting into arguments with Colin Murphy and his friends about her hair. Aspen sometimes wondered if Pippa would have been less fiery if she didn't get teased about her hair so often. Maybe Pippa acted loud and brash to deter people from making rude comments. Not that it ever worked. If anything, it made her even more of a target. Anyway, enough about that. Pippa clapped her hands together. Truth or dare, let's start. Do we have to? Of course we have to. We've already decided. We have? Aspen looked at Lockie. Do you really want to play? Why not? It might be interesting. But don't look so sad, Aspen. I'm not going to make you get into any more washing machines. You wouldn't fit. That hadn't deterred Pippa in the past, but Aspen decided to keep stum? It was 2 against 1. She couldn't win. Aspen had very few friends as it was. She didn't want to alienate the only friends she had somehow miraculously managed to cling to throughout secondary school, strange though they were. Oh, alright, we can play if you really want to. Great, I knew you'd see it my way. Our way. That's right. So, Pippa smiled mischievously. Aspen didn't like that smile. She didn't like it one little bit. Since I'm the one who decided on the game, I think I should go first. Any objections? Objections? None here. I guess not. Great, then I'll ask you first, Lockie, since you've never played before. Truth or dare? Truth. Lockie answered without batting an eyelid. She looked utterly calm and composed in her sheer nightgown, almost like a stone effigy. Alright then, since you've never played this game before, I'll ask you something that'll really make you squirm. I don't squirm. Lockie was right, she didn't squirm, not even when the boys at school made fun of her foreign name or her foreign family or her teeth, which were slightly crooked and seemed overlarge in her small, delicate mouth. Lockie hadn't even squirmed in biology when Mr. Peters, whom Aspen suspected was a sociopath, showed them videos of live maggots being picked out of people's skin. Lockie never blushed. It was almost as though her bronze skin was completely bloodless. Well, if you're so sure, then how about this? When you masturbate, who do you usually think of? Pippa! Aspen's eyes widened, her face flooded scarlet as though she'd been asked the question, not Lockie. You can't say that! Say what, masturbate? No, I mean it. That's personal. That's the whole point, stupid. It wouldn't be truth or dare if it wasn't. But that... I don't know why you're getting so worked up anyway. I asked Lockie, not you, unless you'd like to join in. No, that isn't it. Simply thinking about something so personal, let alone sharing it with her friends, was enough to make Aspen blush to the tips of her ears. I just think it's a bit too far. That question is definitely intrusive. Oh, aren't you going to answer? Just so you know, if you can't answer a question or complete a dare, you'll be punished. How will we be punished? Maybe I'll text my brother and tell him you have a crush on him, Lockie. No, thank you. Do you hate my brother that much? I don't hate him, I just don't want to acknowledge his existence. Pippa's older brother Aaron was 19, he hadn't managed to get into his university of choice, or any university for that matter, and he was waiting to retake his A-levels while working part-time at McDonald's. He was the kind of person who liked to wear offensive shirts, tell offensive jokes, and laugh too loudly at things that weren't very funny. Whenever Lockie and Aspen went to Pippa's house, Aaron tried to flirt with Lockie. He largely ignored Aspen. Lockie regarded him much like one would regard an insect and kept her distance. Well, if you don't want to be my sister-in-law, you better answer the question truthfully, please. Who do you think about when you masturbate? Lockie sighed. She closed her eyes. If you really want to know, Ayushmann Khurrana. Huh? Pippa looked at Lockie blankly. Come again? He's an actor? I knew you wouldn't have heard of him. Hey, that's not fair. You can't choose somebody we obviously wouldn't know. It's not my fault you're uncultured. I gave you an honest answer, so my turn should be over. I guess, but... Pippa scowled, evidently annoyed. Alright, whatever. It's your turn now, Aspen. Truth or dare? Well, Aspen dropped her gaze to her knees. Her face was still spotted light pink with remnants of leftover embarrassment on Lockie's behalf. She could have chosen truth, she supposed, but what if Pippa asked her an unpleasant, intrusive question? The thought was painful. Would it perhaps be better to choose dare then? Pippa could think of some extremely nasty dares, but weren't they a little too old to eat worms? Plus, as Pippa had already reassured her, Aspen really was too big to fit inside the washing machine now. Come on, Aspen, the clock is ticking. Is there a time limit? I might have to impose one if Aspen keeps dithering. If you can't make up your mind, I'll punish you. Now I wonder what I'll do. Aspen's pinched pale face turned paler still. If Pippa intended to punish her regardless of what she did, she might as well make her decision now and get it over with. And so it was, her stomach tying itself into knots, that Aspen slowly said, Then I choose dare. Alright, now that's what I'm talking about. Pippa punched her fist in the air triumphantly. Lockie, meanwhile, raised one of her slender brown eyebrows. That was brave of you. I just hope it wasn't too foolish. Don't worry, Aspen, I know you're a baby, so I won't go too hard on you. I'll make it easy. Don't make it too easy. It wouldn't be fair after what you asked me. Lockie, whose side are you on anyway? I don't take sides. That would be immature. Well, don't worry, you two. I have a really good idea for your dare, Aspen. You're not going to shut me up inside more small enclosed spaces, are you? They'd studied the Cask of Amontillado in English that year, and Aspen didn't want Pippa getting any ideas. Don't worry so much. I might be planning to shut you up, but it won't be anywhere small or enclosed. Where, then? Can't you guess? I'm not very good at guessing games. Please, Pippa, just tell me. Christ, you don't have any imagination, do you? Alright then. An unpleasant smile captured the corners of Pippa's lips. I want you to break into Miss Lay's house. Whoa, dude, that's nuts. That is nuts. I am going to save it here, and we are going to quit on that note. That is a definite cliffhanger, and I will save that for next time. So I hope you guys are enjoying Rituals in the Dark. If you are, tell that like button you want to smash, and don't forget to subscribe. You stay you, I'll stay me. Drugi forever. Thank you everybody so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next video. Later.